In the summer of 1987, two girls left for a neighborhood pool party and never came home. No screams, no crash, no goodbye. Just a pair of towels left folded on their beds and an empty driveway where their friend had dropped them off. For 19 years, no one knew what happened, until a demolition crew found an old VHS tape buried in an attic, and inside it, the last known moments of my daughter's lives. That tape brought everything back. The voices, the night, and the man none of us ever saw coming. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Linda Callahan. I'm from a small town in Ohio, Cedar Pines. I've lived here most of my life. Back in the summer of '87, I was 41, married to Frank, raising 3 kids. My world was small, but it was full. I ran the church bake sale, volunteered at the library, packed lunches every morning with sticky notes that said, "Be good or be kind." That's the kind of home we had. Simple, predictable, safe. My girls Jessica and Jennifer were 17 that summer, twins but not identical in spirit. Jessica was the quieter one, more thoughtful. Jennifer was all fire, the louder laugh in the room. You couldn't miss them blonde hair, matching freckles, always shoulder to shoulder. The only way to tell them apart quick was that streak of blue Jennifer dyed in her bangs that spring. Drove Frank crazy. They were heading into their senior year that fall, and like most kids that age, everything felt like a countdown. Last summer before the real world. Last pool party before homework and college applications. That night, the night everything changed, was supposed to be one of those harmless teenage milestones. A pool party over on the east side of town hosted by their friend Mandy's older brother. Supervised, they said. Good kids, Mandy's family. I trusted them. They left around 6. I remember the way their voices echoed down the hallway, teasing each other about swimsuits and hairspray. One of them sprayed perfume and the dog started sneezing. I laughed. I stood in the doorway as they walked out, Jessica rolling her eyes at Jennifer for wearing wedges. "Don't stay out too late," I said. They waved me off. That was the last time I saw them. The rest of the night was quiet. Too quiet looking back. Frank had fallen asleep watching the baseball game. Tyler, our youngest, was in his room playing with action figures. I did the dishes, swept the kitchen, took the laundry out of the dryer and folded their towels still warm, placing them at the foot of their beds. By 10:30, I started checking the clock. By midnight, I was pacing. At 1:07 a.m., I called Mandy's house. Her mother picked up, groggy. Mandy was home, said she'd dropped the twins off just a few blocks from our place around 11:30, right near the corner of Maple and Ash. I ran outside in my slippers, just walked up and down the sidewalk scanning the dark, like maybe I'd missed something obvious. Their beds were still empty. Frank sat up on the couch as I came back inside. We didn't say much, just looked at each other. It wasn't like them to stay out that late without calling. Jessica always checked in. Jennifer might have pushed curfew, but she never disappeared. Not like this. By 2 a.m., the house didn't feel safe anymore. It felt hollow, like the air had changed, like something had cracked open and we didn't know it yet. The phone rang. I picked it up expecting to hear one of their voices, but it wasn't them. And after that call, nothing was ever normal again. The call came from the police. They'd already checked the usual routes, and by morning they were canvassing the neighborhood asking if anyone had seen 2 girls walking home the night before. Frank and I stood in the living room, the phone still warm in my hand while the sun came up over our quiet little street like it had any right to. The girls' beds were still untouched, their towels still folded where I'd left them. And something in the air, something I couldn't name, felt like it had slipped out of place. Before noon, we were driving around, checking side streets, wooded trails, even the back lot behind the old high school gym. Flyers were printed with the only photo I could think to grab one where Jessica had a popsicle and Jennifer had that half-smile she always made when she was trying not to laugh. By that night, neighbors were joining the search. People we didn't know well, folks from church. A man from the post office fanned out in all directions with flashlights and maps. That first week blurred together just one long stretch of interviews in silence. We were told to stay by the phone. Detectives came in and out. One of them, Ramirez, looked young but serious. The kind of man who took notes even when nobody was speaking. He asked about the girls' habits, their friends, any signs of trouble. There hadn't been any. They were normal girls, busy, loud, alive. Their friend Mandy told police she'd dropped them off just a few blocks from our house around 11:30. Said they were laughing, seemed fine. Nobody else saw them after that. No calls, no sightings. Just gone. The days turned into weeks. July faded into August. Frank stopped shaving. I stopped sleeping. Tyler, only 9 at the time, learned to sit quietly in the hallway just outside the front room, listening to police conversations he wasn't supposed to hear. On what would have been their 18th birthday, I baked 2 cakes. Chocolate for Jessica, vanilla with lemon frosting for Jennifer. I put candles in both and sang to no one. And then, nothing. The case stalled. Flyers came down. Reporters stopped calling. The world kept moving without them. Until 19 years later, when a demolition crew found a box. They were clearing out an old house on the far edge of town near the train tracks. The place had been condemned for years. In the attic beneath a pile of old magazines and crumbling toys, they found a plain cardboard box. Inside was a VHS tape. No label, just the words, "Play Me," scratched into the plastic with something sharp. The crew called the police, and by that evening Ramirez was back in our living room with the tape in his hand. We still had a VCR. I'd kept it in storage, though I couldn't remember the last time it worked. Ramirez hooked it up to the TV while Frank and I sat shoulder to shoulder on the edge of the couch. The screen went blue, then static. For a moment I thought it was blank, just a cruel trick. But then there they were, my girls, standing by the pool, laughing. Their voices came through the old speakers, tinny and soft. They were teasing the person behind the camera, waving their arms, swiping at each other playfully. The sun was going down behind them, and someone had strung lights across the fence. You could hear Splash's music kids shouting. It was just a pool party, just that night. Frozen. Jennifer had her arm around Jessica's shoulders. You could see the blue streak in her hair catch the light. It was the last time we saw them happy. The camera stayed on them longer than it should have. It wasn't like someone was filming the party. It was like someone was filming them. They moved to the edge of the frame, whispering. Jessica leaned in close. You could barely hear her voice over the fuzz, but she said something like, "It's just a little adventure." Jennifer looked uncertain. "Are you sure we should go?" The camera jolted. It followed them as they slipped out through a side gate, glancing back once like they weren't sure if they were being watched. Then black. For a few seconds, nothing. Just the low hum of the tape spinning. Then suddenly, a shaky image of the girls walking down a street. A residential neighborhood. Moonlight. One of them tried to read a street sign. "I think we're lost." Jessica giggled. Jennifer hushed her, nudged her shoulder. Then headlights. A pair of them flaring bright in the distance. The girls ducked off screen. The sound warped, went fuzzy. A low engine. Then silence. The tape cut to static. Ramirez rewound it, checked every second. That was it. Those were the last known moments of Jessica and Jennifer Callahan. Everything after that was darkness. The questions came fast. Who filmed the tape? Why was it hidden? Why now? The tape was sent off for forensic analysis, but the surface was degraded. Still, one partial fingerprint, smudged almost useless, was lifted from the edge of the case. Not enough for a match, but proof that someone had handled it recently. Ramirez started calling in old names, re-interviewing everyone who'd been at the party. Most said they didn't remember much. Others got defensive. Some we hadn't seen in years showed up with casseroles and apologies. It was hard to know who was sincere and who was afraid of what might come next. The footage was played frame by frame. In one background, shot near the pool's back fence, there was a red pickup truck. Parked engine off, facing away from the camera. Another frame showed a group of teens clustered together, shoulders tight, posture stiff, like they'd just seen something. Ramirez built a list. Every guest, every staff member, every passerby from that night. We started again from scratch. The town changed. For the first time in years, news vans lined the street. The story spread beyond Cedar Pines. Rumors returned, old ones and new ones born from the tape. People whispered about a strange man near the fence, someone who didn't belong. Others said the girls had run away. A few even claimed they'd always suspected something darker. Frank didn't say much. He spent hours upstairs walking from one twin's room to the other. I took to writing notes, timestamps, little clues, and calling people I hadn't spoken to in years. I needed to feel like I was doing something. One night, Ramirez called. Said one of his officers had noticed a reflection in the tape, a window near the snack bar. Barely visible, but clear enough. A silhouette. Someone holding the camera. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered. Didn't match any party guest on file. Ramirez released the image to the public. It wasn't much, just a dark outline. But the posture, the way the person stood, that triggered something in a retired teacher. She remembered a substitute gym coach, a man who'd worked at the school that spring. Dennis Parker. Kept to himself. Friendly enough, but quiet. He left town a week after the girls vanished. We pulled his file. Ramirez showed me the photo. Tall, messy dark hair. The stance was identical to the reflection. Suddenly the case wasn't cold anymore. Now we had a name, a face, a direction, and even after all those years, something in my gut told me we weren't done. Not yet. Because if that man was behind the camera, then he was with my daughters when the tape went dark. And maybe, just maybe, he knew what happened after. The morning after Dennis Parker's name came up, Frank and I sat at the kitchen table while the phone rang on and off. Reporters, old neighbors, even people we hadn't heard from since the twins vanished. Some called to offer help. Some just wanted to say they were sorry. But others, they danced around it. Wanted to know if we'd ever suspected him. If we'd ever noticed anything strange about that spring, anything out of place at the school. Frank didn't answer. He just kept turning his coffee mug in slow circles. I didn't blame him. In a town like Cedar Pines, people forget how easily the edges blur between gossip and truth, especially when nobody's sure which one they're looking at. Ramirez showed up just after lunch. He stood in the doorway, rain still on his coat, and told us quietly that Parker had left town the week after the girls disappeared. No formal goodbye, no notice to the school, just packed up and drove off. The district had marked it as a voluntary resignation, nothing more. He hadn't even collected his last check. That night, the VHS tape was watched again, this time in a quiet room at the station with a forensic analyst and a fresh pair of eyes. They found something small. In one frame, as the girls step away from the pool gate, the glass of a nearby patio window catches a reflection. Not clear, but enough. A tall figure holding the camera just as the girls pass by. That frame went to the lab. They cleaned it up, outlined the posture, and compared it to old staff photos. Same build, same slope in the shoulders. It looked like Parker. That was all Ramirez needed to start digging. They pulled employment records from every school he'd worked at since '86. Small towns, temporary jobs, always short-term, always gone before anyone got too close. Some places had no record of him at all, just vague stories passed along by teachers who said, "Oh, him," like they were trying to forget something they couldn't name. Frank sat through it, every bit of it, like someone waiting for a bad dream to wear off. But I couldn't. I wrote down every location, every school, cross-checked each one against missing persons reports. Girls, ages 13 to 18. I found more than I wanted to, more than I could explain away. I started posting in online forums for families of the missing. Some reached out privately, mothers mostly. One sent me a photo of her daughter at a county fair. Blonde hair, same age. Disappeared in 1989 from a different state, but she'd gone to a summer camp where Dennis Parker had been on the maintenance crew. No charges, no trace. Just vanished. Back in Cedar Pines, Ramirez was hitting walls. People from the party clammed up. Some said they barely remembered the night. Others acted like they'd never met the twins. I heard one man, grown now, married with kids, told the police he'd left the party early, even though I remembered his mother bringing over a dish of lasagna for the vigil the next week. Like forgetting would make it easier to carry. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was how quickly the town split. Some folks were behind us steady as ever, dropping off food, checking in, praying with us. But others, they turned sideways, like we'd brought it back on purpose, like we'd asked for the tape to surface. Old loyalties ran deep in Cedar Pines, and not everyone was ready to reopen the wound. One morning, Ramirez pulled into our driveway and asked if we could come down to the station. He said a letter had come in. No return address, postmarked from 3 towns over. Inside was a photograph, old, slightly warped from moisture. Jessica and Jennifer standing poolside, arms around each other, their faces soft in the sunset light. In the background, barely in focus, was a man, leaning against the fence, hands in his pockets, not part of the party, not watching the pool, watching them. The police ran it through their system, looking for fingerprint traces on the envelope. Nothing usable. But the timing of the postmark lined up with a motel guest book entry from the same town. A false name, but the signature style matched old forms filled out by Parker. Ramirez asked the manager if he remembered anything. He didn't. Said the man who checked in that night kept to himself, paid in cash, left early. A week later, a local reporter got an anonymous tip, said to check the old junkyard 2 counties west. There'd been a van there for years, sun-bleached and rusted through. When police traced the original registration, they found it had once been under Parker's name. An alias, but still him. They towed it back for inspection. Inside, behind the driver's seat, under a collapsed shelf of moldy boxes, were several damaged VHS tapes. Most were warped beyond recognition. But one inside, a cracked plastic case, still held something. Footage. Same pool party. But this time filmed from a distance, from behind a line of bushes outside the chain-link fence. You couldn't hear much. The sound was low muffled, but you could see them, my daughters, laughing near the diving board, unaware they were being watched. The camera work was slow, deliberate, never straying far from them. That tape hit differently. There was no laughter in the room where it played, just the quiet hum of machinery and the slow ticking of a wall clock. Afterward, I went home and sat in Jessica's old room, the way she'd left it. Posters still on the wall, faded books stacked beside the bed, her favorite sweatshirt folded on the desk chair. I sat there for hours, listening to the wind rattle the old screen door, wondering how many other tapes there were, and why, after all this time, someone had decided now was the moment to let them surface. The following morning, a second envelope arrived at the station. No note this time, just 2 faded wristbands, the kind the rec center used back in the 80s. One read Jess, the other Jen. The handwriting was familiar. It matched labels I'd once written on their lunch containers. The forensic team examined them and found traces of dog hair embedded in the adhesive. When they matched it to samples taken from Brandy, our golden retriever, who passed years ago, the room fell quiet. Whoever sent them had been close, close enough to touch something from our home, close enough to copy my handwriting. I didn't speak on the ride back. Ramirez didn't either. But when I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, I finally said the thing that had been building in the back of my throat for weeks. Whoever was behind this, whoever had followed them, filmed them, sent those tapes, wasn't finished. They were still out there, watching, and they were just getting started. The house got quieter after that second envelope arrived. Not just the absence of voices kind of quiet, but a deeper silence like the walls were waiting for something. I stopped opening the curtains in the front room. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to see the mail truck anymore, or the people slowing down as they passed, pretending not to stare. Frank stayed in the garage most days, reorganizing the same drawers he'd already gone through a dozen times. He couldn't sit still, and I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the handwriting on that wristband. My own copied like a signature on a forged check. Familiar, but wrong. I kept Jessica and Jennifer's doors open. I couldn't bring myself to walk in, but I needed the doorways there like a tether. I'd started listening to the recovered tapes late at night. The sound turned down low just enough to hear the edges of their laughter. I wasn't looking for something specific anymore. I just needed to hear them speak. One night around 2 a.m., I thought I saw a light flicker through the side window. Just once. Could have been a passing car. Could have been nothing. But it got under my skin. I sat up the rest of the night staring at the driveway, trying not to blink. The following morning, Ramirez came by with a new theory. He'd been watching the footage from the thrift store tape again, the one with the pool party. He pointed out something I hadn't noticed. In the far background, near the corner of the fence, there were two brief flashes, like headlights. Not the bright kind that wash everything out, just a muted glint of movement behind the bushes. He believed someone had been parked there watching, possibly with a second camera, possibly waiting. At the station, they'd enhanced the audio again. There was a fragment barely audible of one of the girls, maybe Jennifer, saying something like, "Not that way." Then nothing. Static. Frank didn't want to hear it anymore. He left the room. I stayed. I needed to. Ramirez said they were going to run the van plates again, cross-check Parker's aliases against other states. I asked if anyone had considered that he wasn't working alone. He didn't answer. That night, I logged back into the forums, posted the newest wristband photo, and wrote a short message. Someone is still watching us. Has anyone else received anything in the mail? I got 24 responses in the next 48 hours. Most were kind, some were confused. But one message stood out. A user with no photo, no profile, just the name Willow East sent me a private reply. It said I was at the pool party. I remember seeing the twins near the back gate. They were talking to someone older, not a teenager. I forwarded it straight to Ramirez. The account traced back to a woman named Allison Green. She'd been a lifeguard that summer, only 16 at the time. She'd moved out west years ago, hadn't been in touch with anyone from Cedar Pines since. When Ramirez called her, she was hesitant, didn't want to get involved. But eventually she agreed to talk. She remembered Ray Carter, said he was a maintenance worker filled in on odd jobs around the rec center. She remembered the night of the party. Said he stayed late long after the staff was supposed to clock out. She'd seen him pacing in the parking lot, smoking, watching the kids. His eyes had locked on the twins. She never forgot that. Ramirez asked why she hadn't come forward before. She said, because no one asked. At home, I started digging through boxes. Old calendars, receipts, notes I'd scribbled during that first year when the girls were gone. I came across a church bulletin from July '87, a prayer list. Someone had written Jessica and Jennifer C. in the margin. Someone else had drawn a cross beside it in blue ink. The handwriting wasn't mine. It looked familiar. I couldn't place it. The next week, the station got another call. A man from the construction crew that had demolished the house where the VHS tape had been found. He'd gone back through his own photos from the site, just snapshots he'd taken for records. In one, you could see a corner of the attic before they cleared it. Just behind the box of magazines, there was something else. A backpack. Small canvas. Faded yellow. I remembered it. Jessica's. She'd used it for swim meets. Ramirez drove out to the landfill with a recovery team. The house debris had already been dumped, but they managed to isolate the section by date and truck route. It took 3 days. On the 4th, they found the bag. Inside, there was a broken watch, 2 hairbrushes, and something wrapped in plastic. Jessica's diary. The pages were mostly intact, water-stained in places but legible. I didn't read it right away. I wasn't sure I could. Ramirez asked permission to send it to the lab first to preserve fingerprints. I said yes. Later, when they brought it back, I sat on the couch and read it cover to cover in one sitting. There were normal entries, notes about school, about college plans boys, a fight with her sister over a borrowed sweater. But the final page, dated the night of the party, stopped me cold. It read, "Tonight is the last night I'll ever be just a kid. Nothing else. No punctuation. No explanation. Just that sentence alone on the page. I couldn't decide if it was excitement or fear. It sounded like both. I called Frank into the room, handed it to him without a word. He stared at it for a long time, then set it down gently like it might break if he moved too fast. We didn't speak for the rest of the evening. The mood in town was shifting. Some people acted like the case was a storm cloud hanging over everything. Others started whispering theories again about who might have known more than they said about why the girls left the pool at all. Ramirez stayed focused. He went back through employee records at the rec center, looked for connections. That's when he found Valerie Adams. She'd been the assistant manager in 1987. Left town just days after the twins vanished. No forwarding address. No resignation notice. Just gone. Ramirez tracked her down in a coastal town 3 states away. She was working as a caregiver, lived alone. When they questioned her, she denied everything, claimed she hadn't spoken to Ray Carter since the summer he quit. But when they pressed harder, her hands started to shake. She asked if Ray had said something, kept repeating that. Did Ray talk? Not what did he say, or what do you think happened? Just that one question over and over. When Ramirez returned that evening, he looked tired. Said there was more to follow, but not yet. Said things were beginning to line up. I asked him what he meant. He said, "It's starting to look like someone helped him." I sat with that sentence for a long time after he left. I thought back to the reflection in the pool window, the notes, the wristbands, the way the handwriting mimicked mine. It hadn't felt like one person. Not for a while now. That night before bed, I opened the back door just to listen. The air was still. You could hear the crickets, an occasional hum from a car on the highway. And something else. Not sound exactly, more like a feeling. Like someone was still watching from beyond the fence, waiting to see what we'd find next. It was early July when Ramirez called and asked me to meet him at the old pool. He said he'd rather explain in person. I parked near the back lot, same place Frank used to pull up for the girls' swim meets, and walked the fence line until I saw him standing by the snack bar. The place had changed, but not enough. The chain link was rusted through in places, the mural by the locker rooms faded to a pale blur. But I still recognized the shapes. I remembered the way the lights used to hum at night, and the smell of chlorine that lingered even after it closed for the season. Ramirez didn't say much at first. He just pointed toward a patch of cracked pavement behind the snack bar where 2 broken cinder blocks had shifted apart. Tucked between them was something small. Plastic. Faded blue. I bent down and picked it up. A dolphin charm. About the size of a quarter. Jessica had one just like it on her keychain the summer she won that ring toss game at the fair. I remembered teasing her that it would fall off before the week was over. She kept it longer than I expected. I turned the charm over in my hand and didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. Back at the station, the analysts had started going through the film negatives they'd recovered from the tin box near the motel pool. Most were too damaged to use, but a few had been cleaned up enough to print. One showed the party in full swing, kids in the water string lights above the pool paper cups stacked near the deep end. But in the corner, almost missed, was another figure. Not facing the camera. Half in shadow. A man standing still, separate from the others. The outline was narrow, his head slightly turned, and the collar of his shirt suggested a uniform of some kind. Ramirez compared it to staff rosters from the pool's operating years. One name stood out. Carl Moody. Part-time maintenance. Worked odd hours, mostly nights. No known record of interacting with the twins, but he'd left town quietly a few days after they vanished. No goodbye, no questions. Ramirez found him in a rural county 2 hours away, still working maintenance, still quiet. When they brought him in, he claimed not to remember the night, said he'd cleaned up the locker rooms and gone home. That was it. But his voice shook, his hands wouldn't stay still. Ramirez said he kept glancing at the window behind the interview table like he was waiting for someone else to show up. Frank didn't want to hear it. He said if they didn't have anything solid, we shouldn't let it distract from Parker. But I couldn't stop thinking about the dolphin charm. Someone had to have placed it behind those cinder blocks. And it wasn't Jessica. The charm didn't mean guilt. It didn't prove anything. But it meant presence. Someone had been there with her after the others had gone. I started writing again, notes, observations, timelines. I didn't trust my memory anymore, not with the days running together the way they were. I stayed up past midnight most nights rereading Jessica's diary. The last line never changed. It still sat there right in the middle of the page. Tonight is the last night I'll ever be just a kid. I asked Ramirez if that sounded rehearsed to him. He said maybe, maybe not. He'd seen stranger things in final entries. Sometimes it meant nothing. Sometimes it meant everything. The podcast that had picked up the case was gaining traction, and with it came an influx of tips, most of them useless. But one man, a former lifeguard named Darren, who had since moved out to Oregon, came forward with something that gave us pause. He remembered Valerie Adams borrowing his car the night of the party. She said it was just for an errand. He didn't ask questions. But when she returned it, it smelled strongly of bleach and something else he couldn't place. Mud, maybe. Chlorine mixed with dirt. He remembered that smell stuck to the back seat for days. Valerie never mentioned what she'd done or where she'd gone. She acted like nothing had happened. Ramirez called her again. This time she didn't pick up. When he drove out to her home, she answered the door, but didn't invite him in. She asked him, point blank, "Has Ray said anything?" Same question as before. Over and over. She was unraveling just slowly enough that you had to look twice to notice. Meanwhile, the forensic lab was still analyzing the towel from the storage facility. They'd found something. Barely visible blood traces. Too degraded to confirm anything yet, but present. That towel had been used, wiped, or wrapped around something. It hadn't just sat in a locker for decades. And the soil samples from the charm and the diary plastic showed trace minerals not common to the pool grounds. More consistent with the lake shore a few miles west. Ramirez didn't say it, but I could tell what he was thinking. That the girls had never made it home because they'd never left the property, not completely. Just slipped off the map somewhere between the parking lot and the trees. Frank started spending more time with old home videos again. I could hear them playing from the den while I made dinner. The girls at birthday parties, laughing in the back seat, opening Christmas presents in matching flannel pajamas. He watched the same clips over and over, eyes fixed on the screen like he was waiting for something to change. I left him alone when he was like that. There wasn't anything to say. The silence between us had grown comfortable like a blanket you don't question anymore. But I caught him once standing at the sink watching the backyard through the kitchen window. He said real quiet, "What if they came back here after I didn't answer?" because that thought had lived in the back of my mind too, not just about Parker, or Valerie, or Moody, but about the town itself, about the people we saw every day. One of them had helped cover this up. One of them had watched us for years. The week ended with another tip. A motel manager remembered a man with a false name, shaky handwriting checking in the night of the party. Said he was jumpy, kept looking out the window. The signature was generic, but the room had been paid in cash and reeked of cigarette smoke and sweat. When the staff cleaned it out the next day, they found nothing. But the logbook still kept in a drawer behind the front desk had one line marked DP. Ramirez took it as confirmation. Parker had been there. Somewhere nearby, maybe waiting, maybe watching. I stood in the doorway that night and looked at the porch where we used to take our family photos. The same wooden swing still hung from the chain Frank had installed back in '85. It creaked in the wind. Empty. I kept thinking about that towel, the diary, that last line Jessica wrote, how she knew somehow that the world was shifting beneath her feet. And as I stood there, the porch light flickering above me, I realized the question that had haunted me since the beginning wasn't what happened to my daughters. Not exactly. It was who was with them in the end, and why, after all these years, that person had stayed silent. Ramirez didn't call me that morning. He showed up. It was just past 8, the sun still low enough to cast long shadows across the driveway. I opened the door and found him standing there with a folder under one arm, the same one he always carried when he didn't want to talk on the phone. He stepped inside without saying much and asked if Frank was home. He wasn't. Gone early to pick up some spare parts for the mower, something to keep his hands busy. Ramirez waited until the door clicked shut behind us before he spoke. "We found something," he said, "but you're not going to like where it leads." He laid the folder on the kitchen table. Inside were 4 photographs taken just days ago. Grainy, zoomed-in the kind that looked like they were shot from far away. A small cabin mostly hidden by trees. No driveway, no mailbox. Just a rusted gate and a sagging porch. "Lake Tully," he said. "Cabin's been abandoned since the mid-'90s. It belonged to Parker's uncle Joseph Carter. Passed away in '92. Property taxes stopped being paid around '93. The place was never listed for sale. Just sat there." I asked him why it mattered now. He didn't answer right away. He pulled out a 5th photo. This one was different. A still frame pulled from an old VHS camcorder. It showed 2 girls' wet hair wrapped in towels standing outside a building that didn't match anything from the rec center. It matched the cabin. Ramirez tapped his finger lightly against the corner of the frame. "This was shot 2 days after the pool party," he said. "The timestamp was damaged, but we traced the tape. It was in a box sold from a storage unit down in Fremont, formerly rented by a David Parker." That was the first time I felt the ground shift again. It wasn't panic. It wasn't even grief. It was something colder than both. We drove out to the property that afternoon. Just me, Ramirez, and 2 deputies. No press, no markers. He said they wanted to keep it quiet until they knew what they were looking at. The road was barely passable, washed out in places, overgrown. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun had dipped behind the trees, and the whole place sat in shadow. The door was still locked, but the back window had been busted in. Ramirez stepped through, first flashlight scanning low. I followed. The inside smelled like rot and metal, not fresh, just old and sunken into the wood. The living room was empty except for a warped recliner and an overturned table. But the back bedroom, what used to be a guest room, was different. That's where they found the rings, 2 thin silver bands, one with a small blue stone, one plain, both tucked inside a rusted tin beneath the floorboards. The same kind of tin we'd seen before near the motel pool. The same handwriting, too, on the lined paper folded beneath them. Ramirez handed it to me. I hesitated. Then I unfolded it. It said, July 18th. J&J stayed here. Quiet. Safe. Not scared. No signature. No other markings. I turned the page over. Nothing. The paper was stained with what looked like old water damage, maybe blood. I wasn't sure. We moved into the second room, what looked like it had once been a pantry converted into something else. There were scrape marks along the baseboards like something heavy had been dragged in and out repeatedly. And on one of the shelves, barely legible, someone had carved initials into the wood. J.C. plus J.L. Ramirez took photos of everything. He didn't talk much. He didn't have to. On the ride back, I asked him what he thought the message meant. Not scared. He said it could have been written by Parker, or someone trying to cover for him, or worst of all, someone who believed it. When we got home, Frank was already on the porch. He stood as we pulled in, didn't ask a thing, just nodded once when I stepped out of the car. Inside, I told him what we'd seen. I didn't show him the note. Not yet. He listened, hands folded, eyes fixed on the same spot on the carpet. When I mentioned the rings, he exhaled through his nose like he'd been holding that breath for 19 years. Later that evening, Ramirez called again. Said they'd found old surveillance logs from a private security firm that had once patrolled the lake area, mostly for insurance purposes. One of the reports from '87 mentioned a complaint called in about a girl screaming near the woods. No follow-up. No officer dispatched. It had been chalked up to kids partying too close to the cabins. The date matched. July 18th, 2 days after the pool party. I sat on the edge of the bed that night and tried to remember if I'd heard anything that summer. Anything at all. But the memory was like a fogged window shapes moving behind it, but no clarity. I got up around 3 a.m. and went out to the shed. There was a box of Jessica's old school papers I hadn't touched in years. Buried beneath report cards and doodles was a note crumpled, torn at the edges, written in her handwriting. Bring towel, back gate. No date. Just that. I stared at it for a long time. I wasn't sure if I'd seen it before or if I'd just forgotten. I brought it inside and left it on the kitchen counter for Ramirez. When he picked it up the next morning, he nodded slowly. Back gate, he said. Matches the direction of the headlights in the old tape. There was something else, too. A staff record from the rec center, barely legible, marked up with whiteout and corrections. It listed a temporary maintenance worker for the month of July, name redacted. But a partial signature remained in the margin Moody. Ramirez looked into it. The handwriting on the report matched the one on the tin notes. Same loops, same pressure, same misshaped D. We had a new name, a new possibility. But more than that, we had something we hadn't had in nearly 2 decades. A trail. That night, Frank sat with me on the porch for the first time in weeks. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, if they were scared, they didn't show it. I didn't answer. Just reached over, touched his hand. The swing creaked beside us. The air smelled like rain. And somewhere past the tree line, a wind moved through the branches like someone walking slowly, deliberately watching again, or maybe waiting for us to come closer. It was raining when we brought Moody back in. Not a downpour, just that slow, soaking kind of rain that seeps into the wood and stays there. Ramirez didn't tell me much over the phone, only that it was time and that Moody hadn't asked for a lawyer. I waited in the hallway outside the interview room, staring through the two-way glass while Ramirez slid the photo of the tin box across the table. Moody didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just looked at it for a long time like he didn't recognize it or like he recognized it too well to pretend otherwise. When he finally spoke, it came out quiet, raspy. He said, I didn't want to be part of it. I was just supposed to clean. Ramirez didn't rush him. Just let the silence settle until Moody kept talking. Said Parker had called him 2 days before the pool party. Said he needed a favor, nothing serious. Just clean up after hours at the lake property, cash under the table. Moody was struggling with rent. He said yes. He always said yes to Parker back then. Claimed he didn't know the girls were involved, not at first. Just assumed it was another one of Parker's get-rich-quick scams, maybe some under-the-table party for clients he wasn't supposed to be entertaining. He said the first time he saw the girls, they were already inside the cabin. One of them crying. One silent. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, he kept saying. It got out of control. He wouldn't or couldn't name the second man. He just said he wore gloves and he kept checking the time. Ramirez asked if it was Carter, if it was Valerie, if it was someone from the rec center. Moody just shook his head. He was younger. He knew them. The pieces were shifting fast now, too fast to hold steady. Ramirez called in every open file on the rec center staff maintenance records security rosters. Most of it was incomplete. Too many seasonal workers. Too many hands that came and went. But one name repeated more than others: David Parker's nephew, Lucas. He would have been 17 that summer. Moody never said his name, but when Ramirez laid out the photo lineup, his hand hovered too long over Lucas's face. That was enough. They brought Lucas in 2 days later. He was living in Ohio now. Had a wife, a baby on the way. No record. No history of violence. But when they showed him the photos, the charm, the tin, the carvings, he cracked. Not loudly, just quietly. Like the truth had been sitting inside him so long it had nowhere else to go. He said Parker made it sound like a joke at first, a kind of game. Lure the girls out to the lake after the party, get them on camera, sell the tapes. They wouldn't be hurt. Parker had promised, just scared enough to look real. But something went wrong. One of the girls tried to run. The other fought back. Lucas didn't remember who said it first, but the word contain came up. Then the word erase. He said Parker made the decision. That he was calm. That he'd done it before. Ramirez asked how long they were at the cabin. Lucas said 3 days. Food was brought in once. No heat. Just the bare minimum. By the 3rd day, the younger girl, Jamie, wasn't talking anymore. Jessica wouldn't eat. Parker said it was time, said they'd already gone too far. Lucas left before it happened. He said he didn't see it. He just heard the screen door close behind him and kept walking through the woods. Moody stayed behind. And Parker finished it. I sat in the hallway while they wrote it up. I didn't ask to be in the room. I didn't need to hear the rest. Just the sound of Lucas crying quietly into his sleeve was enough. Later that night, Ramirez brought the files to the house. He laid them on the coffee table and didn't say much. Just told us what would happen next: formal charges, federal review, likely an exhumation order for the area behind the cabin. Frank sat with his hands on his knees, staring straight ahead. He hadn't moved in 10 minutes. I finally asked the question out loud, the one I'd been holding for years. Did you ever know back then? Did you ever wonder if it was Parker? Frank didn't look at me. Just said I knew the second he hugged me at the search party. Too tight. Too long. Like he was trying to prove something. I went outside around midnight. The air was still thick and the clouds hadn't moved. I walked to the edge of the yard where the woods started and listened. Just stood there, letting the dark wrap around me like it always did. I kept thinking about that last line in the diary. Not scared. Lucas said Parker made her write it. Said it was part of the illusion, so the tape would look clean, so it wouldn't raise alarms. I thought about Jessica writing that down, hands probably shaking and still spelling every word right. I thought about how much she must have known even then and how she'd written it anyway. Not for Parker, not for the camera, but maybe for me. Maybe as a message that she understood, that she wasn't going to give him what he wanted. Ramirez said we'd likely recover remains fragments at best. Bones, buttons, maybe traces of fabric. I asked if that would be enough. He said yes. Enough for charges. Enough for a trial. But not enough for comfort. Nothing ever would be. Just before he left that night, he told me there was one last thing Moody had confessed, something else. That on the third night before Parker gave the order, Jessica had asked to leave a note for me. Parker let her write it, but then burned it after. Moody said the fire smelled like wax and pencil shavings. Said he saw Jessica crying, but not begging. Just crying. Quiet. Steady. I asked if she said anything before it ended. Moody looked down at the table, then she said, "Tell my mom it wasn't her fault." That's when I finally cried. Not loudly, just enough that it felt real. Just enough to carry it with me to morning. They brought in cadaver dogs first. 2 teams, both trained for cold case terrain. The cabin had long since rotted out, half the roof gone. Windows busted, floor warped with moss and water damage. But beneath the deck, behind the rusted propane tanks and half-buried tires, there was still enough undisturbed ground to hold a story. They flagged 3 points, all within 10 feet of each other. Ramirez stood with the forensic team while they marked the perimeter. I stayed back by the tree line. Frank didn't come that day. He couldn't. I didn't push it. The first trench turned up fragment small bones consistent with adolescent hands or feet burned at the tips like someone tried to char away identifiers but gave up halfway through. The second site revealed fabric synthetic blue torn in a curved pattern. I knew that pattern. It was from the swimsuit I'd bought for Jessica the week before she vanished. She'd wanted something plain, something without all the ruffles and sparkles other girls were wearing. Just navy blue one strap. Simple's fine, she'd said. The team found 3 sets of remains in total. 2 were children. The third was larger, more decomposed, but consistent with an adult male. Moody. DNA would take time, but no one doubted it. What shook me most wasn't the discovery. It was how fast it all became procedure. Bagging, cataloging, chain of custody. All those years I'd begged for attention on the case, and now suddenly everything was moving on schedule. Like a machine had clicked into place. Lucas was remanded to state custody while the DA worked through the plea arrangement. He'd confessed fully, which spared him a murder charge, but he wouldn't walk free. Not after what he'd enabled. He'd served time for obstruction accessory and the trafficking element tied to the original footage. Parker, though he didn't get the dignity of a trial. They found him dead in his apartment the morning after Lucas was booked. Heart attack. Natural causes, they said. I don't know if I believe that. Maybe something inside him finally gave out when he knew it was over. Or maybe he knew it would all catch up, and he didn't want to watch it happen. Moody's death complicated things. Without him alive to verify the rest of Lucas's testimony, parts of the timeline had to be reconstructed by hand. The boxes of old rec center footage, staff logs, supply receipts, and visitor rosters were all pulled from storage. I went through the logs myself one afternoon, sitting alone in the records room with nothing but a pencil and a yellow legal pad. That's when I noticed it. One of the logs from July 17th, the day after the party, listed an off-the-books equipment rental, 2 generators, 1 portable light stand, and a large cooler all signed out under the name D. Carter. Valerie Carter. That name again. The same woman who ran the fundraisers, who stood beside me at search briefings, who offered to bring casseroles. She wasn't listed anywhere else in the investigation. Never arrested. Never questioned. But there it was in her own handwriting. Ramirez didn't want to push it. Said the statute on evidence tampering that old would be tough to apply, especially without knowing exactly what her role was. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. Valerie had known what Parker was doing. Maybe not the full extent. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to keep quiet. Enough to help him clear out that cabin before police ever got close. I didn't confront her. I didn't have to. 2 days later, she closed her shop, left town, and never came back. I heard she moved in with a sister out west. Changed her last name. I didn't follow. Letting her disappear felt like the only mercy I had left. The cabin was demolished before the frost came. The crews worked quickly, quiet, and professional. No ceremony. Just one last day of sawdust and smoke, then nothing but earth. Ramirez let me keep one item from the evidence room, the heart charm. I held it in my hand that night under the porch light. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just older. Frank sat beside me holding a mug he hadn't touched in an hour. We didn't talk much, just listened to the night sounds, an owl, the rustle of dry leaves. Life going on around us. Jessica and Jamie's remains were laid to rest under a maple tree in town, not far from the elementary school. A small ceremony, no cameras, just family. I read a passage from a notebook Jessica had once kept, a short one about fireflies. They don't shine because they're happy she'd written. They shine because it's dark. I never knew what that meant when she first wrote it. I think I do now. After everyone had left, I stayed behind, fingers pressed to the stone. Someone had left a folded paper crane between the flowers. I don't know who. Maybe one of the girls' old classmates. Maybe someone I never met. I didn't move it, just let it be. The girls were home. The truth was out. That should have felt like enough. But when I looked at the cemetery gate and saw it swinging just slightly in the wind, open, not quite shut, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still hadn't come through. Something still waiting in the silence. I turned to go, but I didn't look back. Not that day. Not yet. I still go out there sometimes. The edge of the woods where the cabin used to be. It's just open land now, quiet, scrubby, nothing to mark what was there except a faint rise in the dirt and the way the trees lean a little too far in one direction. Most folks in town don't talk about it anymore. The ones who knew have grown older, moved away, or buried their knowing deep enough that it doesn't surface in conversation. But I remember. Not in a way that hurts like it used to, but in the kind that stays rooted in your ribs, the kind you carry. Lucas is still serving time. He writes occasionally short, stiff letters, mostly updates on his sentence or comments about things he's read. He never mentions Jessica or Jamie by name. I don't write back, not because I haven't forgiven him, but because there's nothing left I need to say. He made his choices. He watched those girls walk into the dark and didn't stop them. That silence will always belong to him. Frank and I, we've done the best we could. There are still days when the smallest thing brings it back. A bike left out by the curb, a light in the woods, the sound of laughter that cuts off too suddenly. But we've made a kind of peace with it. The grief doesn't flare like it used to, it hums. And in a strange way, the truth helped, even when it gutted us, especially then. They eventually named the trail that runs past the elementary school after the girls, Jessica and Jamie's path. Just a small wooden sign carved by a local artist. Kids walk it every spring during field day, holding hands carrying balloons. I walked it myself one afternoon early March when the ground was still half frozen. I didn't expect anything. I just wanted to see it. There was a blue ribbon tied around one of the maples, the kind you'd use on a gift or a school project. I stood there for a while looking at that ribbon, thinking how many hands must have tied something just like it and let it go. We never found all the children, the ones from the tapes. Most of the evidence was too old, too fragmented, and too few families were willing to reopen that kind of pain. Some just wanted to believe their kids had run away, started over, somewhere escaped. Some couldn't face the other possibility. I respect both. As for Moody, there were people who called him a monster, and they weren't wrong. But to me, he was something worse, someone who hid inside the ordinary. A familiar face. A man who taught swimming lessons, handed out flyers, stood beside you in church. That's what still gets me. Not the brutality, the proximity. I keep one photograph on the mantle now. It's not official, not a school portrait. Just the two girls on a summer day, barefoot in the grass, holding popsicles, faces half lit by the sun. You can't see the house in the background. Just light trees and the blur of motion. That's how I choose to remember them. Not frozen, not stolen, but laughing, moving, still whole. If this story meant something to you, if it made you remember someone or notice something you hadn't before, consider sharing it, so their names stay lit even in the dark.